What is up, APUSH class? Today we're doing Unit 3 Review, Part 1. So let's take a look at this thing. This is 1754 to 1800, 12% of your exam. We're starting off here with the end of the French and Indian War. We'll go through all the Sugar Acts, the Stamp Act, Townshend Act, these increasing restrictions on the colonists until we get to the Revolutionary War, 1776. Then we'll look at the Revolutionary War, we'll look at the Articles of Confederation, Northwest Ordinance, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the forming of a new government, and then we'll end with the election of Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so let's start off with periodization. Like I said, our start date is 1754. This is the start of the 7 Years' War, also called the French-Indian War. We'll talk about this in more detail, but you have the Ohio River Valley claimed by both the British and the French, and that is going to cause a war. Now, our end date is the election of Thomas Jefferson. We'll go through 3 presidents this unit. We have George Washington, we have John Adams, and we have Thomas Jefferson. So we're going to end with that election of Thomas Jefferson. Now, politics and political parties. Pre-revolution, we have a whole bunch of acts, and all these things are the British increasing control over the colonies. Now, why are they doing this? They need to pay off the enormous expense of the French and Indian War. And they fought this war to protect those colonists, so they felt that these colonists should be the ones to pay for it. You should know things like the Proclamation Line of 1763, which we have discussed, the Sugar Act, Currency Act, Stamp Act, all these things, Quartering Act, where the British are going to force the Americans to allow troops to stay in their houses. We have the Boston Massacre, which is a bunch of colonists are going to start throwing rocks at British guards, and they're going to open fire on those colonists. The Tea Act, the Boston Tea Party. You have the king dismissing the petition of the First Continental Congress. So again, we have the British increasing control over the colonies. Now, post-revolution, as far as politics goes, we have the Articles of Confederation in 77. Now, this is the first try at forming a new government for these Americans, right? It has a few problems, though. Number one, it has a very weak federal government. There's no tax power, there's no controlling commerce regulation, so it really creates a very weak federal government. And these states have all the power. They are sovereign, meaning they control everything within their own borders, and they don't really have to listen to the Fed. Now they're going to try to fix that with the Constitutional Convention, okay? And through this process, we get 2 new kind of political parties called the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, who will become the Democratic Republicans. Now these Federalist guys, kind of led by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, John Jay, they are looking for a strong federal government. And they're going to try to convince the American people by publishing these Federalist Papers, which are like 84 something essays that are published over time, and they're published alongside this Constitutional Convention, okay? Now, Constitutional Convention, they're trying to fix those Articles of Confederation. So they're saying, hey, do we want to amend this thing? Do we want to make a whole new document? What is that new document going to look like? And like I said, the Federalists, under Hamilton, they want to form a strong federal government. The Anti-Federalists, will become the Democratic Republicans under Jefferson. They want to form a weak federal government. Now, the Constitutional Convention, eventually, they will make the Constitution of the United States. The whole thing is based on checks and balances. So it's going to break our federal government up into 3 different branches, the legislative, executive, and judicial. You guys know those pretty well. And it's going to make sure that it's a strong federal government, but it's a checked and balanced one as well. You should also know Washington is elected president in 88, takes office in 89. That is our first elected president. And we have John Adams as second president in 1796. Now, foreign policy and wars. We've talked about this before, but the 7 Years' War, 56 to 63, is really our starting point here. Also called the French Indian War. Now this is between France and Britain, and it all starts over this Ohio River Valley right here in North America. And both of these powerful countries are going to claim that territory. Now Washington, you should know that Washington was an officer during this time. If you remember, he wasn't a very good British officer at this time, but he is going to serve under the British military, and he's going to meet a lot of military commanders and get to know them, so that when the Revolutionary War happens, he will be a well-known military commander at that point. Now, the important thing to note is that France had all of this red territory before this French Indian War, okay? After, all that French land is now given to either Spain or Britain. So France is out of North America now, and we are just Britain and Spain at this point, okay? That will change with Louisiana here, but we'll get to that at a later date. Now, Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783, okay? This is between the colonies and the British. So these are the colonies fighting to get their independence. Now, if you remember, we had that salutary neglect policy with the British. They're busy fighting their own wars. They don't really care about the Americans. They're kind of leaving them to their own devices. And that allows those Americans to gain a lot of independence, right? Before they actually declare political independence. So when the British start to reapply the taxes and the regulations they had on the books, the Americans decide to have a revolution and break away from their mother country. Now you could know a couple of the battles just to have in your back pocket, but the important thing is to know the Treaty of Paris, 1783, is going to establish freedom for the colonists in a new country. You also need to know the French Revolution. This is important foreign policy-wise. Now, the French Revolution is after the American, right? So it's based on a lot of our ideals. So you would think the Americans would want to go support the French, but they don't, okay? Washington, in his farewell address, in fact, you should know this, he says that America shouldn't bother itself with Europe's fighting, okay? And Europe shouldn't bother themselves with our fighting. We should be isolationist, and everyone should leave us alone. We should leave everybody else alone. Now, Washington takes it a step further with Jay's Treaty. This is a treaty between U.S. and Britain, and you can imagine how angry that makes the French, right? The French helped us in our revolution against the British, and now we're going and making treaties with them, so the French are very upset. In order to kind of appease that anger, Americans are going to send a couple of diplomats over to France in what is known as the XYZ affair. The French are going to say, yeah, we'll talk to these diplomats, but they got to pay us a big fat bribe. The American diplomats get pissed. They flee back to America. America gets scared. They're going to fight the French in a war. They're going to create the Navy. Congress is going to create the Navy, and we're even going to have a little quasi-war with the French over this XYZ affair. Eventually, we'll sign a treaty with the French, and these tensions will relax. But just know that during this time, we have trouble with Britain and France. Economy. So before the revolution, you should know that boycotts were an important part of the revolution, right? Britain had passed a lot of taxes on the colonists in order to pay for that 7 Years' War. Honestly, they didn't get that much revenue from those taxes. The colonists were far away. They simply just either didn't pay it or they just smuggled their goods past the British. So didn't really work. But the colonists are going to do what's called boycotting, or not buying British goods. These include tea, right? Britain is the main supplier of tea in the United States at this time. By the way, everyone drank tea at this time. Coffee was not popular at all, but that is going to change because of these boycotts. Now, we also are going to boycott finished goods. Okay, the British make a lot of finished goods like paper, furniture, tools, farming equipment, things like that. And Americans are going to start saying, hey, we should make our own and screw those British guys. They don't deserve our money. Okay, so there's a lot of boycotts. Now, after the revolution, as far as economy goes, you do need to know about the first bank of the United States. Okay, Hamilton over here is going to say, hey, we're a new country. Maybe our government should have a way of collecting taxes. Maybe it should be able to pay national debt. Maybe it should have a way to pay state debt. And so he's going to push for the first bank of the United States. Okay? It does come into law. It is signed up for a 20-year contract, basically, and Congress will decide to let it expire in 1811, but we do have the first bank of the United States. Hamilton creates it, a Federalist, so know that. It's very important. Lastly, we have expansion. What new territories is the new United States going to gain? First off, we have the Northwest Territory up here, which America is going to win in the Revolutionary War. So all this new territory is ours. Now, is it unoccupied? Of course it is not. There are Native American tribes up there, which is going to become quite the issue. We'll talk about that next video. But we do have the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This is important because it's going to outline how they're going to make new states in this new country. So it basically says once you get a certain level of population, you can apply for statehood, and then you can make your own constitution, and you can become a state just like we do today. One important thing is that it's going to outlaw slavery in the Northwest Territory, while in the South, these states are going to expand their territory and bring slavery with it. Now that is interesting because we are starting to see this sectionalism, right? We're starting to see the line drawn between the North and the Southern states, which is going to set us up for the Civil War in the next two periods. Now that's the end of part 1. I will upload part 2 tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure you're staying safe out there. Quarantine it up. Don't go outside unless you're walking your dogs.